Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are going to discuss the final event of the 2021 Call of Duty League season, the $2.5 million Call of Duty League Championship that happened this past weekend. And we're also going to begin to talk about the juiciest part of the year, RosterMania. But before we do that, let's check in with a very happy Yankees fan. How are you doing, Bink? 11 straight
I'm
wins.
doing well. 11 straight wins, yeah. Tonight was a little tricky, and, a lot of their wins this year have come down to the wire, and never easy is the team motto. So they pulled off another nail-biter tonight, but, doing well. Yankees won. I got a big win in softball tonight, first round of playoffs, or semifinals of playoffs. So, yeah, just ready to talk about final event of Cold War.
We're going to have a big party when you win the World Series of Western Connecticut Softball League or whatever. So let's get into this. We had a really, this is the most fun event that I've experienced this year. I thought that obviously the stakes are so much higher because it's champs. The legacies are essentially on the line. If you can't win champs, you're probably not going to be considered one of the greatest players of all time. We've seen Crimsix and Clayster and Karma. They've made their kind of fame and their legacies have been cemented because of these events. And this past weekend we saw Atlanta FaZe, who we have long considered to be the best team in the world. They had 3 of their 4 players were MVP candidates, and to the surprise of very few, if anyone, they win the 2021 Call of Duty League Championship. They defeat the Toronto Ultra in 8 maps in the grand finals. They only lost 3 maps in 3 series for this event. They swept the Subliners, swept the Empire, and then they beat the Ultra in the grand finals. So congrats to FaZe, and I tweeted about it. Congrats to Ultra because they had an incredible year. So congrats to FaZe. But we're gonna go day by day, match by match, kind of give our thoughts of what we were thinking about when the event was happening. And let's start on the Thursday matches. The very first match of the event, we saw the Minnesota Rocker, who were coming off of that crazy Stage 5 major win a few weeks ago, and they were facing the Dallas Empire. So Minnesota, they had a lot of expectations. Certainly people were thinking maybe they could be, as good as they were a few weeks ago, but they come out, they get swept by Dallas. What do you think of this match? I think we both agreed that it was one of the harder matches to predict just because Minnesota had such a great run.
Yeah, if you guys tuned in to our show last week where we previewed champs, or if you checked out our Twitter account, we tweeted out our bracket, and in the show, obviously, we built our bracket, which was pretty much chalked, especially starting out with this match right away. We said it was going to be a close one. Me in particular, I had I was explaining that I thought it was going to go game 5. I had it 2-2, and I could see it going either way in that game 5, and I gave it to Minnesota. We ended up both picking Minnesota to win this one, but Dallas just shut the door. We talked about it multiple times on the podcast throughout this entire 2021 season, but this has just been a matchup we've seen multiple times. Don't even know the exact number, but it's definitely over 5. Probably 8 or 9 if I had to guess off the top of my head. And it's gone both ways, back and forth throughout the season. But, Empire get the last laugh in the final showdown between these two teams at the biggest tournament. In particular, I know Shotzi absolutely popped off in that first map. Went 25-10 in the game 1 for this one. Moscow Hardpoint, which Dallas won 250-147, and then it was double raid after that. Dallas won raid search 6-1 and raid control 3-1. So wasn't exactly a close series, especially for people being excited to see Rocker, how they would perform following their miraculous comeback at the Stage 5 major. Dallas kind of just came in and I don't want to say shut everybody up because I don't know. But they definitely, it was a statement win for sure.
Yeah, from my count, so Minnesota won the first 2 series against Dallas this season, and then Dallas won in the Stage 2 major against Minnesota. So that's 1-2 for Dallas, 2-2 for Dallas as they beat them in stage 3 group play, and then 3-2, 3-3, 4-3. So 7 matches between these two teams this season, and Dallas, I mean, they get the edge, and they get the most important edge because they win in champs. They send Minnesota down to the losers bracket, make them kind of play an entire single elimination tournament, essentially. And they move on to winners bracket round 2. So if you're tuning in on Twitch, you can obviously see we got the bracket pulled up, the completed bracket for champs. And if you're wondering, you can also look on our YouTube channel and find it there. The VODs pop up there the day after the day the podcast is released. So Minnesota, they drop down to losers bracket. Dallas advances, and then the other winners bracket round 1 matches, we had Optic Chicago versus the New York Subliners. Both of us incorrectly predicted that Optic would win this match. We were, in our defense though, we were just concerned about kind of this inconsistency within the roster because Clayster, he returns for this event. He hadn't played since, I believe, week 2 of stage 5 group play. So he's been gone for, about a month, at least in official matches. He's obviously been practicing with the team, and they come in and they upset Optic. They win 3-2. This is just kind of an incredible win. They absolutely demolished them on hardpoint, and then in Search and Destroy, like the way the series went for the first 2 maps, I was like, man, this is exactly what happened in the stage 1 major with Optic in New York, where New York just kind of blitzed them and they didn't let them get anything going. And it even went to checkmate control, which that stage 1 major series that ended on checkmate control, but Optic's able to bring it back. They almost get the reverse sweep, but they don't, and they drop down in the losers bracket. What do you think of Clayster's return and how the Subliners looked against Optic here?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, was pretty surprised to see New York take this one, all things considered. Just like you said, because all the struggles New York most recently went through with the roster and everything. So this was definitely a big win. In retrospect, it makes sense. Clay shows up at champs, and him roaring, feeding off the crowd, stuff like that. Like I can understand how he was obviously excited and probably feeding some adrenaline to those young guns on New York alongside him. But it was obviously, for me, I don't know how much we've actually talked about it on the podcast, but it's definitely a thing in like Call of Duty, especially in older tournaments where it was multiple day, like setup format with like group play and then bracket play and stuff. There was always talk about Optic teams in the past coming out slow in some of the tournaments. And I guess that's like the closest comparison we can make here, right? Like they were, in most people's eyes, I feel like they were the favorites coming into this match, considering, they had a decent performance at stage 5 major, New York having to go back and forth with rosters, all that jazz. And they lose the first 2 maps right away, and that's like, a slow start. You can't dig yourself in a hole like that. They definitely battled, obviously, tried to come back, force the game 5, but New York ends up taking both searches here and is able to send Optic down to the losers bracket right away.
Yeah, this was, I mean, I can't say it's like quintessential Optic because quintessential Optic is winning hardpoint, then losing that search, possibly even losing control, and then bringing it back on that second hardpoint. They just, I don't know, like, we've talked about it a lot, like in terms of just like them looking like they weren't the best team all year round. Like they have not proven at any single point that they were even maybe a top 2 team, which has probably been really frustrating for their fans. And this series isn't that bad in terms of like the way like Scump carried them, but like we'll talk about it a little bit later in the Optic matches, is that Scump didn't seem to have as much help as he really needed, and I thought it was just a very interesting series as a whole. Obviously, New York came out and they played really, really well. Um, and I think that I don't know, like what do you think Clayster brings to the team? Obviously, they didn't have, um, they had Diamond Con, and he didn't look bad or anything in when he stepped in Stage 5 and the Stage 5 Major. But what do you think that Clayster brings to the team that say like Diamond Con can't?
I think it's that hype factor. Like I was just saying, like obviously, this was Diamond Khan's rookie year, so I don't know him too well. But I mean, like if I had to compare Clay and Diamond Khan from what I've limited seen from Diamond Khan and what I've seen from Clay throughout the years, he's that guy who's going to be boisterous, get up and yell and try to get the team, the guys around him excited. And I feel like that's important. Like, some teams. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but kind of drawing a blank. It just I feel like there are some people who respond well to that kind of thing. Like thinking of just like the old OG Cole team. Like they're all getting rowdy and yelling at you and letting you know that they think you're bad, all that jazz. But there's also people who like don't really respond to that. And I guess like just one example that I think about when you think about the iconic Killa Choo Choo Train video, um, you have like Killa, Parasite, and Mir all yelling at Envy, and then John is just sitting there, not saying a word, playing the game. And I'm not like that's just an example that comes to mind, but there's obviously like different personalities with the different people on multiple teams. So um, I feel like it's small sample size here because obviously we didn't get to see Asim play with Clay at the Stage 4 major, which was the first major back with back on land, and then Clay didn't play in the Stage 5 major, which was the first land back with fans. So this was really our first time in a while where we got to see that Clay, get hyped and obviously I can't say for sure how much of a factor it is, but I feel like it had to have played some role for these guys. Um, Hydra played well, obviously his first champs. Um, but yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of just saying like I'm not really sure how much the hype factor plays into it, but there's just Clay has that veteran presence and that's what he brings to a team, especially for a major tournament like this, the big one that he's won 3 times throughout his career.
Yeah, he was going for the three-peat for this, which would have been just incredible. Um, Obviously, it doesn't happen, but this has been a really, the commentators touched on it throughout the event when they were casting New York games, and we've been talking ad nauseum about it. But the struggles that this New York team has faced in and out of the game, it's been kind of ridiculous. So, I mean, a big win over Optic. They go to the winners bracket round 2, while Optic they drop down to losers round 1. To the shock and horror of to Optic fans. So let's talk about LA Thieves versus Minnesota Rocker. The Thieves, they're coming in. They start in the losers bracket because they were not in the top 6. So they start in the losers bracket. They have that huge disadvantage. Florida also has that disadvantage. In the Thieves, they come out. They win the first hard point. You got to be feeling pretty good if you're a Thieves fan. They lose the search. They lose control. And then they come back, they tie it up with another hard point win, and then it goes to, I believe it was Miami, search and destroy. And let's just say it didn't go too well for pretty much everybody but Slasher. The Thieves, they lose game 5. They are eliminated from COD Champs, which is, pretty disappointing for this team because they have a great roster, a lot of talent on their team. They lose, and Minnesota moves on to losers round 2. What do you think of this? I think John's performance has to be pointed out as like he did not do well at all, and I know people are giving him a hard time on Twitter, but it was a pretty bad showing for him in his first CDL champs and his first big tournament since what was that, Black Ops 4?
It's been a while for me. Yeah. I was gonna touch on John just a little bit before talking about the actual match, but just from a numbers perspective, he went 59 and 101, had the fewest kills and the most deaths in the series. That's negative 42 and a .58 KD. And I know we've said multiple times throughout the show, KD isn't everything, all that. And I just feel like that's a tough look for him because the format didn't do him any favors in that sense, right? Like the Thieves only get this one match to play, and he struggles in it, and that's like that's the most recent thing on everyone's minds. Like if they're thinking about John going into the off season, they're thinking about in his last series he struggled. So that's really tough for him. I feel like but obviously, he's a world champion and a world champion MVP. So he's had success in the past. It'll be interesting to see if he kind of, gets another opportunity next year. Not too sure what's going to go on with that. But I was definitely happy. Obviously, you don't like to see anybody really struggle like that, but it was definitely cool that he got a shot back in the league this year in any fashion. Just obviously unfortunate that at the big one it turned out the way it did. But that's the big takeaway for me here with this series was just the Thieves won their hard points but lost 2-3-5. And I think I didn't put it in the notes, but I know I was listening to the flank after this first day, and I think Slasher was talking in the Twitch chat for the flank and saying that they weren't able to practice S&D for, I don't remember the exact time, but it was like an extended period of time. They weren't practicing S&D because it turns out Kenny had COVID. I believe he tweeted that. I'm going to look really quick before I said it.
He did tweet about having COVID.
Okay, yeah. So I'm pretty sure that was like the reasoning. Could be wrong, but I believe that's what he was like trying to say, which is tough. And again, it comes back to the format. They start in the losers bracket right away. If practice wasn't ideal and search heading into this matchup, and Rocker's been a good search team, it kind of makes sense that they weren't able to come out with a win here. Obviously a tough ending to their season with just playing this one and done. Didn't even get to play on Friday at Champs, but I think we'll see. We already saw the Thieves make multiple roster moves this season, throughout the season. I think in the off season, the Thieves are going to try to right the ship, make a big splash, and start Vanguard off on a strong note to try and avoid. Obviously we don't know the format or anything like that, but the lesson here has got to be like if this format continues, you really want to be in that top 6. Even if you're in the top 8, you don't want to be 7 or 8 and only have one life in the losers bracket.
Yeah, so Kenny's tweet was after they got knocked out, he said, had COVID and was forcing myself to scrim, got to LA and ran into problems with my test. Didn't even know if I'd be eligible to play. First rounded at Champs. Also, what a year, just mentally exhausted. On to the next. So,
Yep.
Disappointing end for their season. Let's talk about the format a little bit because you touched on it. And Slasher, who got eliminated in the first round with the Thieves, he tweeted in response to Aches and Looney. So Looney was basically kind of congratulating Simp and Abizi for getting to 3 straight grand finals. And then Aches, who we need to have on the podcast one time because it would be incredible. He said 2 series for grand finals now, though, kind of pointing to FaZe. They only had to beat New York and Dallas to get into grand finals. And if you've been watching a competitive Call of Duty for a long time, you remember events were essentially like a marathon, not a sprint. If you could last basically 4 days and dozens of matches, then you could be in the grand finals. But so and Slasher, he replied, he said, if the format isn't changed after this year, then I just don't know what to say. 12 total matches this year at Champs. I believe I played 11 myself at Black Ops 4 Champs. So yeah, obviously when he played 11, I'm not sure if that's the correct number, but he played a lot because he was playing for the 100 Thieves, and I'm pretty sure they were in the losers bracket, so they
Yep.
kind of had to fight through. Um, what do you think of the current format for champs? So the top six start in winners bracket. The seventh and eighth place team, they begin in losers bracket. And if you're, say, Atlanta or Toronto, the two teams that eventually did get to the grand finals, they had to win at minimum 2 matches. And in Toronto's case, they had to win 3 matches to get to the grand finals. So, what did you think of this champs format compared to years past?
I will always, just as a long time COD esports fan and, working around it forever, it seems like, I will always have fond memories of those old school style champs where, you had your multiple days of group stage. Sure, you had 32 teams, so there were some teams when, you got an amateur team from Europe, just for example, going up against, Optic and IW, like it's not necessarily close. Like that's the downside to that format. Not all the matches are close. Whereas in this format, all of these matches were really close. It felt like even if they were 3-0s, like they were competitive for the most part. Um, but I just feel like right now with the way the CDL is, with only 12 teams, it's tough to follow up that old school format that longtime fans have come to expect from champs. Like there's so many historic moments from champs in the past, and the event just has a certain pedigree to it. And when you put it in perspective, like Slasher kind of did there, it raises questions. But I really feel like with only 12 teams in the CDL, if we get expansion or until it happens, I'm not really sure what else could have been done here. The one thing I saw people mentioning, I'm pretty sure it was just doing like an 8-team winners bracket, where like there would have been no bye for FaZe and Toronto, and like FaZe would have played. Florida came in 8th, right? Was it the Thieves who came in 8th
Well,
or
they
Florida?
tied for eighth.
Okay, so whatever. So the 1 seed would play the 8 seed in the first round winners bracket, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5.
Oh, you meant the
That
regular
doesn't
season.
give like,
Gotcha.
huh?
You meant in the regular season where they played?
Yeah, I couldn't remember
I'll
which
look it
one
up.
finished in
I
seventh
thought
or
you were
eighth off
talking
the top of
about
my head. It
champs.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I was just saying, like, that's the only way I could see them, like, if they're gonna do this format with only 12 teams and 8 making champs, then like maybe they could change it to everybody is in the winners bracket at the start and doing like 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, the bracket that way. Then everybody gets 2 lives at the tournament. I don't know logistically how that would work. I feel like from a bracket standpoint, it makes sense because you would just add, not like 8 is a decent number usually for brackets, like 4, 8, 16, 32. Like it works um for brackets. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely think in terms of having like all the teams at champs, I don't remember the exact way it worked out last year. I know like top 8 started in winners bracket and bottom 4 was in losers bracket, and I think like first and second seed got like 2 round buys. I think this is better than that, even though unfortunately, those seventh and eighth seeds were starting in the losers bracket. Um, so I'm not really sure. I think it's just something. It seems like the CDL, whoever is working on tournament stuff and that, I feel like they've been receptive to a lot of what we've at least heard, like people talking about them wanting. Like we got to remember there was like a point where it was only just the home series and stuff, and then people were like, well, not every team is at these tournaments. We want tournaments back, all that. And then this year we got tournaments again with all the teams competing at it. And it's not the same as like your MLG Opens back in the day where you have the group play, or the group stage leading into the bracket. But I think it's like the next best thing, or just the closest they can do with what they have. But I feel like there's there's always going to be questions about whatever the format is. Um, you can't please everyone. Someone's going to be upset. I mean, even if you look at like the NBA this year, they had that play-in bracket or whatever for the playoffs, and people were upset about that. So, um, just an example. You're never going to make everyone happy. But I think as time goes on, the CDL will try to, keep listening to what these pros are saying, hopefully at least, and try to, make as few people mad as possible.
Yeah. I think expansion will help if, say, if it,
Yeah.
it got even to 16 teams. 16 is a great number, and
Yep.
you just split it in half. You say 8 teams get to playoffs, 8 teams don't, and we're gonna have like a double elimination bracket with 8 teams, and it's less of an issue if everything is the same. So if every event is on land, then there are fewer complaints because if you don't perform on land, then you don't get to go to playoffs. Like I think I don't want, so in my opinion, I don't want champs if it's supposed to be like a playoff and kind of like you're rewarding teams for their regular season performance. I don't want it to be everybody gets in because then what's the point of the regular season? You could really just have, you could be absolute crap for 5 6 months, and then at champs you could have the greatest event of your life and win. I don't necessarily want that because then it's just like what's the point of even playing the regular season, which is kind of like the NBA. The NBA has like a problem with who who cares about what you do in the regular season. Like teams and players, they don't care as much because they know that even if they're a 6 or a 7 seed, they could just go and win in the playoffs. That it's not a big issue if you're not the first or second seed. So I don't know if there's like a perfect way of constructing champs without, say like a 32 team league, because then you could have half the league get in to the playoffs, and then you could split it up into 16 teams and 4 groups, and then everybody's happy because they get their classic champs feel. But I don't see us expanding from 12 teams to 32 teams in an off season. Although that would be incredible just for the absolute mayhem that would be involved, but I don't see that happening. It's definitely, this champs was definitely better than last champs in terms of the format, because I looked it up, and so Atlanta and Dallas were the top 2 seeds at the 2020 Call of Duty League Championship, and they began in winners bracket semis. So they had to
Yep.
win 2 series to get to the grand finals, and Dallas ended up winning 3-2 against Toronto, 3-2 against Atlanta, and then they played a best-of-9 series against Atlanta again in the grand finals. So they played a total of, I believe that's 11 maps, and I know that's like, it's similar to FaZe, who played, I think, 14, if I'm not mistaken, this season. But that's one more 3-0 that they had to go through. So I don't really know if there's a perfect way of doing it. I definitely think it can be improved over this current one, but who knows what the actual format would have been. I don't know if this would have been the way that they planned it, had COVID not been an issue and kind of like just the extenuating circumstances. I'm sure they thought that they were going to expand after season 1. 12 teams, I don't think they were expecting that. So a lot of things probably could have been different, but it's only season 2. No pro sports league ever figured it out at the end of the second season in league history. So hopefully we get a better format for season 3, a better format for season 4, and we just continue on until we're getting paid like millions of dollars to be on like the Call of Duty network on TV, and we can put our feet up and say, "I told you, just you gotta be patient." So yeah, I think it'll all work out in the end, as most things do, or at least we hope most things do. Um, let's get into these Friday, or we have one last match on Thursday. So we had the Florida Mutineers. So they finished 8th place in the Call of Duty League regular season.
Okay.
So they kind of get the misfortune of playing Optic, who are coming off of a loss in the final match of the day. I mean, Optic is Optic. Even though they lose that first round match, they come down the losers bracket. They do what they do. They win the respawns and they lose the search. They win 3-1 and they eliminate Florida, who played the fewest maps of any team at the event. They played 4 maps and they are out with a top 8 finish. Optic just they looked like the Optic that we thought they would look in the New York series, and they advance to losers round 2. Any takeaways from Optic's win here?
Nope. Really, like you said, typical Optic win, getting those respawns, and dropping the search. Just to note some stuff we talked about in the last episode. Kind of a tough spot here for the Mutineers, just because most people were expecting Optic to take down New York. If New York came down to face Florida, Florida would have been facing the team that eliminated them from the past 2 majors with different lineups. So kind of a tough spot for them, regardless of who they ended up facing here. And we've talked about kind of like just like the flip flop coin flip, sort of back and forth that we've seen from Florida all year, just with their in terms of consistency. We never saw the same Florida show up on a consistent basis, and I guess kind of just sums up their season here. They were able to get that search win, but in the end they weren't able to make anything happen at champs.
Let's talk about Florida real quick because, obviously this is the end of their season. You touched on it. They've been kind of a coin flip which Florida shows up today. Will they be able to beat, the number 1 or number 2 team, or will they lose to Paris or something like that? It's always been this entire season, even with Havoc in the lineup or whether it was with Slacked in the lineup, they just haven't looked very consistent. What do you think happens with this Florida roster? Because this is the second season, so second full season for Skies. So Skies was, I think an MVP candidate last year. He was by far one of the best players in the game in the 2020 season. And in the first half of the season, I had Awakening in my top 5 for MVP candidates. I just said that if they're not going to be a top team, he's not going to win, essentially, because that's how MVP awards usually work. He didn't have a fantastic series, but he did have the highest KD of any of his teammates in this series. He had a 1.0 KD. What do you think is the future for Florida? Do they keep with Awakening and Skies and Neptune? Like obviously Havoc. This is his second season with Florida, but he came in mid-season off the bench for this year. What is the future in your mind for the Mutineers?
So we were talking about it before we went live, but like Slacked and Looney were doing a show on their Twitch earlier today, this afternoon, where they were like speculating on some rosters. It was purely just like a fun exercise where they were like looking at the teams and just like thinking about who could go where, and like I said, it was speculation, nothing serious or anything like that. And I believe what they had in their exercise was the roster of Skies, Awakening, Neptune, and Hook. And I thought that was interesting. Obviously, not really sure if that would actually happen. But they brought up a good point, with Ogre 2 being the GM there at Florida, it feels like Neptune is probably going to stick around, like a Halo kid. Like, it would be surprising if they just, like, went another direction with him after one season. And I think he played well. He was, it's his first year in pro Call of Duty. And obviously, he had his struggles at times, but he also had moments where he definitely shined, considering it was his first year. So I think the bigger question is just what are they going to do with Skies and Awakening? I feel like maybe it might have just been Cold War, but I feel like they were both like a main AR really in this game instead of like Awakening being more of a flex. Like I feel like he was an MW. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing. The other thing they were talking about on the Looney and Slack, we're talking about was they don't know about the contract situation with Awakening because he came in mid-season last year. So they don't know if he like signed a 1+1 through the last year and had to have it extended or anything like that. Whereas Skies, like you mentioned, was on the team for both full years, so he most likely had a 1+1 and is technically a free agent. Um, so that could play a role in what Florida decides to do if Awakening and Neptune are like still under contract. Uh, Obviously early days for RosterMania, but it'll definitely be interesting to see what Florida decides to do. They didn't make that many roster moves this year, but if you remember back to MW, obviously they brought, was it Pharaoh who was the first one who was brought in for Pristini?
Yeah, and
Can't
then
remember. And then
I'll look
Mox
it up.
was. I feel like there was three people they brought in. Obviously, Pharaoh, Awakening,
Yeah, so
and I feel like I'm
Pharaoh
forgetting.
replaced Pristini in March, and
Yep,
then Pristini got transferred in May to Chicago, and then Awakening
yep.
replaced Mox in May. And yeah, so
And that
that was
oh,
it.
that was it. Because then they had Frosty, Skies, and Havoc.
Yep.
Okay, so not a ton of moves there, but obviously they were willing to make moves last year to bring in, like up and coming talent. We had obviously seen Pharaoh play before last year, but outside of like a champs appearance from Awakening and Black Ops 4, that this was last year was really his first shot on a pro team. So um, we've seen Florida is willing to go after the young talent, especially again this year they gave Neptune a chance to be in a situation to immediately start his COD career in the pro scene. So maybe they go down that route and try to pick up another amateur pro or up and coming player. We don't really know. It'll be interesting, definitely.
Yeah, I thought the first two seasons, Florida hasn't had the star-studded roster, but they've been able to field competitive teams. If they were able to put it all together this season, I think they might have been a top four team at their best. They just were not consistent enough to do that. They also have Yeez as a substitute. He obviously didn't
Yep.
play, so he's a Challengers player. He showed a lot of promise, at least from what I've heard in Challengers. So maybe he is an option going forward. Who knows? I know that a lot of Challengers players, they I feel like there will be more Challengers opportunities for a lot of players now because they had kind of a more coherent season this year compared to last, which was kind of all over the place because of COVID. So maybe more Challengers players show up. And what you were talking about, the 1+1 contracts, I think that is a really important aspect to how RosterMania goes because um, I'm assuming that almost all of the players that were signed to their team at the beginning of last season, I'm assuming that they pretty much all have 1+1s. Like, Seattle, obviously Octane is not going to be there, but the Thieves with Kenny and Slasher, I would assume, are 1+1s as well. I mean, I don't know, but that's what I
Yeah.
would assume, just considering they stayed on the same team. Although Thieves were Optic LA last year, but like the same thing. They were there last year. They were there this year. Who knows what contract situation is going to be like, and if players end up retiring, like we'll talk about a bit later with Looney, but who knows what say Florida's roster looks like if a bunch of player movement happens around them and something comes up.
Yep. It's all gonna hinge on that first domino to fall. Something big always happens, and then it just leads to a bunch of other stuff. They were talking to earlier, just real quick. Looney and Slack were mentioning being unsure of like Dallas's situation with contracts. They were like speculating as to if it was possible that Hastro uh extended their contracts last year to like make them so like they had the 1+1 last year and then they extended to another 1+1 for this year. Um, Not really sure. Obviously, that was all speculation. They said they didn't know for sure what was going on. But that's just my point. There is just that there's a lot of contract stuff here that we don't know for sure what's going to happen in RosterMania. So we're going to have to wait to hear from the orgs what's going on, or maybe Crone drop some Chrome bombs and have some reports for us later.
Yep. We'll get to a little bit of WrestleMania at the end of the episode. And then let's move on to these Friday matches. So we have Toronto Ultra versus the Dallas Empire in the winners bracket semifinals. We've seen these teams match up plenty of times before. Always a great match, and this was no exception. Dallas wins 3-2. They went to a round 11. I'm sure our Ego Chall correspondent, Trim, I'm sure he was pulling his hair out because in that game 5, Dallas goes up 5-2, and then they just kind of let Toronto come back and force a round 11. Fortunately for Trim and every other Empire fan, the Empire, they win 3-2. They send Toronto down into the losers bracket, and they advance to the winners finals and secure top 3, I think. Top 3, I believe, if you get to winners finals. So an impressive performance here for Dallas. What did you make of Dallas coming in and beating Toronto?
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, what we did for our Ego Chall bracket was that we said Rocker was going to beat Dallas, and then we picked Toronto to take down Minnesota. So obviously we were 0 for 2 there in that section, but it was just, Dallas coming out and pulling off another win that maybe some people didn't expect. Obviously we didn't predict it, but for a team like the Ultra we talked about on the last episode, this was their first match since that, historic collapse. I don't really know how else you can word it. This was their first match since that Stage 5 Major Grand Finals where they ended up losing to the Rockers. So the question on my mind, at least, and probably on a lot of other people's minds, was how was Toronto going to respond? I feel like throughout the season, Toronto was like one of those better teams that was composed most of the time, had good comms. So I wasn't expecting the Stage 5 Major to have a major impact on them necessarily. But either way, Dallas just wins this one in Game 5. It was a really exciting series. I remember, I feel like in each map there was like 1 or 2 players that were, necessarily popping off. And in those cases, it was that team that ended up winning those maps. But I have here that Dallas was up 5-2 in the Game 5 surge, and then Toronto was able to force the round 11, which Dallas ended up taking the round 11, but still, Toronto didn't give up. They fought, and obviously we know they get back to the grand finals, but this was definitely, at the time on Friday, it was a good match, and people were just, certainly, I don't want to say doubting, but just, questioning what was going to happen with Toronto down in the loser bracket.
I think that's a fair question, at least. I know, I don't think that it was. I think one of the casters probably said that they probably think about it every day, and it's like I don't know if that's true. Like that seems like kind of an overreaction. Like I'm sure it does every time they think about that match, or every time that say they're thinking about Minnesota, or game planning for Minnesota. I'm sure they think about like, man, that sucked. Like that's probably one of the worst moments in their careers. But I also don't think it would have. Maybe it's just like maybe it's hindsight considering what I know Toronto did after this loss, but I wouldn't think that it would weigh as heavily on them as say if it happened during this tournament. Like had they blown a huge lead, in the winners bracket, and then in the losers bracket they have to kind of mentally reset and try to win. So at least it wasn't this event for them. They do lose this match, which bumps them down to losers round 2, so they would play Optic there, and Dallas they move on to the winners finals, which they meet Atlanta FaZe, who they just kind of just mollywopped New York. This is the phase that we expected in the Stage 5 major and even kind of expected here because the last time that FaZe lost, I think it was whatever, Stage 2, Stage 3, whenever Simp was like, I'm so pissed off, like I've never been more mad in my entire life. Like that kind of motivation, I think that can factor into a match like this, especially since Atlanta had the bye and they were able to game plan for both Optic and New York, and then they got to see New York's win over Optic, so they could see whatever kind of strategies or however the vetoes were going to go. FaZe wins this series 3-0. Before the match, though, Simp was named the 2021 Call of Duty League Most Valuable Player. The other finalists were Cammy Shotzi and Simp's teammates Celium and Abizi. We've been talking about it for months, but we both thought that it was either going to be Simp or Abizi. It just so happened to be Simp. But congratulations to him. He's obviously very deserving of it. And something that came up after the event that we didn't know about, but FaZe, I believe, so Sean Collins of the Dallas News covers the Fuel and the Empire, but he reported that 3 of the 4 Atlanta FaZe players had COVID before the Stage 5 major. So that could have been like obviously a very dicey situation for them in terms of preparation if most of the team has COVID. He said that Simp was the only one that didn't get it and that they were worried about being able to compete at champs, but they tested negative just in time. And I believe Simp also tweeted something similar about like they were just kind of unsure if they were even going to be able to compete, which had also been something that Optic had to go through because they had the Envoy and Scump tests that were positive and then negative. And then we found out that Kenny also had COVID before champs. So, obviously well wishes to everybody involved because that's scary and that could have affected a lot of things. But at least FaZe, they come out, they absolutely dominate New York. Do you have any thoughts on FaZe's return to dominance?
Yeah, I mean, COVID situation aside, this is what you expect from the best team all season long. Similar to the question I posed earlier about how would Toronto respond to the collapse at the Stage 5 major, the question for FaZe coming into this match was how are they going to respond to their worst placing of the year when they went 0-2 at the Stage 5 major and were eliminated by Seattle Surge with a top 8 placing. Obviously, unlike Toronto, FaZe responded with a win here. And it was, a typical win that we saw multiple times from FaZe throughout the season where it's just, super fast 3-0. They take care of business, handle everything. It was 250 to 149 raid hard point, 6-3 Miami Search, and 3-0 in the control. Obviously, we've talked about Atlanta's control just being absurd all season. So everybody went positive on Atlanta. Abizi and Arcides had 1.13s, and that was the lowest on the team. Whereas for the subliners, Hydra had a 0.9, and that was the highest. So, just basically what you expected here. If we saw Optic versus FaZe, that could have been a little more interesting in my opinion, just because the green wall factor and obviously like sort of a rivalry might have been, more of a hyped up match. But we did see subliners beat FaZe in that winners final of Stage 3 major. FaZe obviously ended up winning the grand finals, but I think this was the first time we saw them play since then. They might have played in group play without Clayster. I can't remember.
Yeah,
I feel
I
like
don't know.
everything's blurring together for the season, even though it just ended. But regardless, this was, FaZe comes out, silences any doubters right away, and gets a 3-0.
Down to the losers bracket, we go to losers round 2. The final 2 matches of the day are losers bracket matches. We had Toronto versus Optic Chicago. I put it in the Twitter group chat, but I was just kind of stunned that one of these teams was going to go home with a top six finish. Top six isn't bad or anything, but just that one of these teams was essentially going to play. So Toronto, if they lost, they were going to play 2 series at champs, and if Optic lost, they were going to play 3 and go home. So I just it was a really really good series. Toronto, they end up winning this series. This was in our bracket, the Ego Chall bracket. We said that this would be the losers finals. We were a little bit off on that, but we did talk about this matchup, and the conclusion we came to, although we ended up picking Optic for the memes, we both came to the conclusion that Toronto was the better team. Like they, especially head to head, Toronto had kind of just completely dominated Optic in terms of like the win loss record, and we didn't think it would be too much different. We were right in that aspect that Toronto, they're just simply they were the better team this season since Insight's been in the team at least, and they win 3-1. They eliminate Optic with a top 6 finish, and they and Toronto advances to the loser bracket semifinals. So Optic's run ends here. They are they got to be pretty disappointed, obviously, because there was that great shot of Scump after the loss, just kind of blankly staring off, like, what more can I do? Like, I can't. I mean, it was he did like his best like LeBron impression or KD impression, like, I am doing so much for this team. Why can no one help me? It kind of seemed like that throughout the entire tournament, in my opinion. And in this series, like the stats don't really show that, but at certain points, Scump just kind of took over, and then there wasn't the follow up from his team, and I think that was most evident on Raid Hardpoint. So, what do you think of the series, Toronto's win, and what do you think of Optic's season as a whole, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, Toronto kind of, you know, wins both hard points. I think the control was super close if I'm remembering it correctly. But like kind of like you mentioned, Scump notably went on a impressive 10 streak in the latter half of the game 4 raid hardpoint, and it just wasn't enough to get Optic over the edge there. They lose that game 4 250 to 230. And it's just a tough year for Optic. Obviously, it's their first year back with the real Optic, or however you want to word it. And they didn't win any tournaments this year. And, for the most popular team in Call of Duty, the Green Wall expects results right away. So it'll certainly be interesting to see if anything happens in RosterMania. Personally, I think we can talk about it in depth later or in another episode. But I feel like I wouldn't be too surprised if this roster stuck and they tried to work things out, maybe get some like coaching staff support, staff surrounding the team to try and help them out in that regard. But certainly, if a spot somehow opens up on Optic, everyone's going to be drawn to that to see, what they try to do in the offseason to change things and get some better results tournament-wise in Vanguard. The big thing, obviously, Scump mentioned on stream, and we talked about it in an episode whenever that was, that because of the 1+1 contract situation, he doesn't know if he's going to sign a new contract, or him wanting to see the trailer for Vanguard or see some gameplay before deciding if he wants to continue competing. So that's obviously a question. I feel like we see Scump back next year. It would obviously be extremely devastating if we don't, just because, basically he's the face of COD, and he's an electric player, as he showed at COD Champs. Anybody who questioned him heading into this year, he had a really good year individually and statistically, even if the championships or the results weren't necessarily there. So I certainly hope he comes back, and I expect to see him competing again next year. But we'll just have to wait and see what goes on with them in the offseason.
Yeah, Optic, not only did they not win an event, they didn't get to a grand finals in any of the tournaments that they were at. So, stage 1 major, 4th, stage 2 major, 5th, 6th, stage 3 major, 4th, stage 4 major, 4th, stage 5 major, 3rd, and then at champs, 5th, 6th. So, yeah, they didn't have a good season. I think this might have been the first year in which Scump did not win an event in his career.
World
It's
War II, right?
Did they not win something earlier in the season? Let me look.
Yeah. No, because TK won the first few events. Then
Okay.
it was Rise.
Yeah. Okay. So this is his worst event. I guess that if you count like stage 2, that's the only thing. But yeah. So Scump Scump teams have historically been very successful. He's one of the like he has like 30 titles or whatever it is, like event wins. So that's kind of amazing, but a bad ending to the season, not for him personally, because in that raid hard point he was kind of world starring and he looked like like MW3 Scump or like AW Scump, like that kind of player. And I thought he had a really good season individually. It just didn't seem to click with this team for whatever reason. I'm not sure if it was a roles thing where maybe I don't know. Like I don't know what you do with this roster because on
Yeah.
paper this roster looks very good, and I think the only, in my opinion, like what I would do if I were like Hector is probably replace Formal with somebody, but it's like who can you replace him with? This was the problem that we ran into earlier in the season when Optic was struggling a little bit more, and they had that. I think it was like a 2-3, like stage 2 or stage 3 or whatever, where they didn't look good, and we kind of talked about it, and we couldn't really figure out who would be a suitable replacement for any of the players because they have a really talented roster, but we've
Yep.
just, I mean, this is pretty disappointing for Optic fans to, go 1-2 in the in at champs and get eliminated like this. Yeah, I don't really know. I know we'll get into it in much more depth this season, especially if Scump retires. That would be a huge thing, or if somebody gets dropped, then we kind of theorize about who could fill that void. But yeah, just really disappointing for Optic. They go out with a top 6 finish, and Toronto moves on. Let's talk about this Minnesota New York matchup. The other losers round 2 match. We didn't expect New York to. I don't know if we expected them to even get this far. Maybe we thought they beat Florida, so they would have been on the other side or whatever. But they play Minnesota. Minnesota coming off of their win against Thieves, and the Rocker win 3-1 to eliminate Clayster. So the hopes of the 3P becoming the first 4-time champ, his hopes are dashed, and New York is eliminated. What'd you think of this series?
Yeah, the thing that stood out to me here um, was obviously we saw Minnesota lose to Dallas to start things off, but then they have that losers bracket round 1 matchup against the Thieves, and they win 2-3-5. So they don't. The Thieves win both hard points. Minnesota wins both searches and the control to take that win. Now we go to this series against New York, and we've talked about at length since Hydra came into the team for New York. It feels like Hardpoint was New York's like best or go-to mode. But in this series, Minnesota flips the script and they win both hard points to take down New York, where New York wins the search. So I thought it was a little interesting, just because it was a different way for us to see Minnesota take that win. And yeah, like you said, ends Clay's hopes of that historic three-peat slash his fourth ring. Will be interesting to see what New York does in the offseason. We saw earlier today that Revan announced he is a free agent. So um, I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty sure he's from New York, and I feel like he works well with JP. So I wouldn't be surprised if New York resigns Revan. But technically, if his contract's up and as a free agent, he's obviously able to explore his options and see what else is out there. So will be interesting to see what New York does in that regard in the offseason. But for this tournament in particular, big win for the Rocker that sets up the rematch that a lot of people wanted to see here.
Yeah, they move on to losers round 3 and play the Toronto Ultra. On Saturday, we kicked off with the winners finals between FaZe and Empire, a rematch from last year's champs winners finals and last year's champs grand finals. FaZe versus Empire. FaZe, they just are absolutely dominant. Simp, he we didn't talk about it against New York, but he shot Clay's body, which we love that.
We
Very
love that.
we very much encourage shooting bodies. He continued it in this series. He still shot bodies, and there was no bad juju. They win 3-0. They this was one of their most dominant performances in recent memory. And against Dallas, who were coming off of wins against Minnesota and Toronto, the two teams that made it to the Stage 5 major grand finals. And I would consider Toronto, like even before this event, probably the second best team, or at worst third. So big wins for Dallas coming in, but they look like they're not even in the same league as Atlanta in this series. What'd you think of FaZe's dominance?
Yeah, I mean, my immediate reaction post series here was I didn't care who Atlanta faced in the grand finals. I was I don't want to say hoping, but I thought it would have been really cool if Atlanta just 5-0'd whoever they faced in the grand finals and won champs without dropping a single map. That's what I was looking for. And it felt like that was really a possibility because at this point, after this Dallas series, FaZe only played 2 matches, and that goes back to the format, whatever. But they played 2 matches, they won both of them 3-0, so they have a 6-0 map count at COD champs at this time. So that was where my head was at. Really strong performance out of Cell and Simp here. They both had over a 1.5 KD. In the series, it was a dominant 250 to 118 win on Garrison Hardpoint. The search went down to round 11, but FaZe took that, and then Raid Control was 3-1. So another strong performance by FaZe, and like I said, my head at this point after seeing 2 back-to-back 3-0s was how cool would it be if FaZe just goes 11-0 map count to win champs after what happened at the Stage 5 major?
It would have been incredible. Maybe not from like a viewer's perspective, other than like
Yeah.
maybe watching like the 2017 or 2018 Warriors kind of just absolutely demolishing teams. But just from a historic perspective, like the most dominant champs, run is probably Cole in 2014, just kind
Yep.
of running through teams and Ghost, and obviously complexity is if you don't think they're the best dynasty in COD, they're probably second. But who knows? Atlanta FaZe kind of they're making their mark as like this great dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's an off-season topic. File that in the off-season
For
topic
sure.
jar. Uh, they win 3-0. They advance to their second straight champs grand finals. For like Simp and Abizi, this is their third straight champs grand finals because they were a part of the United roster that won in 2019. So really big, and Arcities too. So for 3 of the 4 players on FaZe, this was their well, Arcities wasn't. Never mind. Just disregard.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, so a big win for them. They
I
advanced to the
mean,
grand finals. Yeah, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say that's a kind of crazy stat if you think about it, just because Simp has been competing for 3 years, and he has never not made it to the grand finals of champs.
Yeah. And same for Abizi. But
Abizi,
I thought he was a rookie in
I
Black
think
Ops
he
4.
played. I'm pretty sure he played on Enigma
Oh,
6
yeah,
at
yep,
Champs in World War II,
yep.
and like got like top 16 or top 12 or something.
Yeah, I do remember it now because like I think I wrote an article about him joining E6 back in World War II. So yeah, so just an incredible. They're all. I think someone pointed out. I forget who it was. After Phase 1, they basically said like Simp has 2 champs wins, and like he obviously has gotten so much money from like the past like 3 years of winning events or getting really high placings, but he can't actually buy alcohol in the United States because he's only like 20 years old, which is
Oh, that was Got X.
yeah, just an incredible thing. Like he's literally 20 years old, and I believe he's like fourth or fifth on like the top like Call of Duty esports like earnings list now because he won 2 champs and he went to champs grand finals last year. Just wild stuff for Atlanta. Let's talk about these other Saturday matches before we get to the grand finals. So we had Toronto versus Minnesota. Like you said earlier, the rematch that people really wanted to see because Minnesota came back from 0-4 down in the Stage 5 major grand finals and beat Toronto. It didn't work out quite like that in this match. I believe that Maven said some like it was hysterically like kind of stupid, but like in a good way for Maven because he basically said like Toronto should not get up in the series because it's better to like be even with them than like get a 2-0 lead and blow it. I was like, no, like definitely don't just start throwing your like second and fourth maps so you can not blow a lead. But
I must have missed that. That's funny.
yeah, Merck was just like, I don't know about that. So Toronto, they win this 3-2. They get the revenge. This is like Minnesota will always have that incredible comeback, but Toronto gets the last laugh here. They win 3-2. They advance to loser bracket finals. Um, just kind of a incredible series as a whole, but you would expect nothing less from these 2 teams. They played 9 maps at Stage 5 Major Grand Finals. I believe it was 12 maps or whatever. I believe they played Toronto earlier in Stage 5 Major, so they played a lot recently, and
Yep.
they get their chance here. Minnesota, they come up just a little bit short. A great run for them though. I definitely did not expect this out of them going into Stage 5. So congrats to Minnesota. They finish with a 4th place finish for champs. They get a bunch of money. What do you think of this series?
Yeah, this was a really exciting one. Like you said, you kind of hit a lot of the talking points. I feel like there was just a ton of super cool moments throughout this series. I know it started out on Checkmate Hardpoint again, which was the first map of the grand finals for Major 5 where Toronto absolutely just demolished Minnesota. And that brought up that whole debate of like Toronto playing from the losers bracket, no real winners bracket for Minnesota, all that. They played again in this series, which some people were questioning why that happened. I think they were talking on the flank about it being like a veto situation where they didn't want to play another hard point, so they had to leave checkmate open or something like that. I can't really remember. But regardless, Toronto just comes out. It wasn't as convincing as the Stage 5 major, if I remember correctly, but it was still a 100-point club
They
to kick
combined for like
off this
120
series.
points over 2 maps.
Yeah, yeah. But then, Minnesota responds with a 6-5 win in Game 5 search. Toronto was up 5-3 in that one, and Minnesota comes back, wins 3 in a row to tie up the series. And you kind of like, yeah, if you're thinking like minor similarities, you're like, oh, another comeback from Minnesota, and obviously not a 5-map comeback, but it's still a comeback in that S&D. Like, are we going to see something happen again? But then Toronto clutches up in the control. I wrote down that Cammy had a clutch 2-piece in the round 5. I'm pretty sure Toronto was like on defense and time was dwindling, and Minnesota had to get on the point, and Cammy got like 2 kills to, keep them off the point and let time expire, if I'm remembering that correctly. So that was pretty cool. And then we saw Major Maniac had a really nice clutch in the game 5 after Minnesota comes out, facing the 2-1 deficit. They win rated hardpoint 250 to 188 to force a game 5. And now again, even though it's not a reverse sweep, people are still starting to think like, oh damn, we're going to game 5. S&D, you saw what happened. Stage 5 major towards the end of the series. Minnesota was clutching up in those S&Ds, but Toronto turns up, and they went up 5-3, similar to map 2 in the series, and that's when Major Maniac had like a 3-piece in what I guess that's round 9. So like again, it's kind of like gotta get the gears turning, like is something else gonna happen here, another comeback, but then Toronto ends up closing it out 6-4 to get that revenge that you talked about.
Yep, they move on. Toronto does to the losers bracket finals. They secure top 3, and they played Dallas, who sent them down to the losers bracket. So in that first match, Dallas wins 3-2. In this match, things go a little bit differently. Toronto, they just keep fighting. Like they never gave up. But they did kind of let game 4 slip away from them. Raid hardpoint. It comes down to I believe it's P1, right? Is rings P1?
Yep.
And I mean, if you played raid hardpoint, P1 is not a very big hill, so like it's not like there's going to be a lot of contest time at the end. I pointed out the spawns as like the determining factor here because both Toronto and Dallas, they spawned really close to P1. So I believe it was Vivid. He spawns like back jungle, so he's got to kind of run around for a little bit to get to P1. But I believe it was Ilya and Shotzi, because of Krim's positioning, they spawn back laundry and they're able to immediately contest the point. And at this point, it's like 248 to like 243 or something in favor of Toronto. Shotzi and Ilya are able to get Toronto off the point. They pretty much just team wiped them, and they grab the last few seconds. They win 250 to 248 to force that final game 5. And in game 5, we were talking about it in the Twitter group chat, but Trim, I believe, was actually losing hair watching Dallas's S&D. Express, not their best map. They did not look very good in this map. Vivid got kind of roasted by a lot of people for the way he played. Illy, he is the Pope, but he drops a donut in the final map for Dallas at Champs, which is obviously really disappointing. And Toronto, they win this series, and they eliminate Dallas, and they advance to the grand finals. Just give me your thoughts on this series and kind of a revenge match for Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for me that sticks out obviously is that game 4 ending. You did a good job summing it up, so don't have to go too much into detail for that. But if you guys didn't see the ending of that game, you should definitely go check it out because it was potentially one of the most wild endings we've seen to a hard point, and potentially in all of Call of Duty history. Certainly this year, but but potentially just maybe all time it goes down as one of the most wild hardpoint endings. But regardless, if we look at those 2 series that Dallas played against Toronto, Dallas was 4-0 against Toronto in hardpoint at COD Champs. They obviously, in that first showdown, they win the 2 hardpoints in game 5, but that means because this series went game 5 and Toronto gets the win. I mean, Dallas was 1-3 in search, 0-2 in control, and 4-0 in hardpoint against Toronto at this tournament. So yeah, just certainly interesting considering, like we talked about, Dallas's search against other teams. You expect them to be a strong search team, but obviously Toronto had their number at this event, aside from that, first Game 5 showdown, which I believe we said that was round 11, right? Yeah, that went down to round 11 because Illy had the clutch on raid, like in the corner on the B-bomb site. So, the one search map Dallas takes off Toronto in search at this at champs, was around 11. Other than that, Toronto won the other 3 searches. So just interesting to look at that game mode breakdown. Was certainly an interesting season for Dallas. They obviously aren't able to defend the throne and repeat as world champions here. But certainly, with everything that happened behind the scenes with Hook, the period where they had Fellow in the roster, to when they bring in Vivid, and they didn't have immediate success in online stage play, but then they had that first major back on land, so stage 4 major, where they kind of went on that run and got to the finals. That was kind of like an eye-opener for a lot of people, including myself, to the potential of the team. And, we see it at this major, even though they don't end up taking home the title, they do come in third, which I feel like, all things considered, for that team is a decent placing.
Yeah, definitely a good placing considering kind of the turmoil that they were going through earlier in the year. Like you said, with Hoot getting benched and kind of the drama that surrounded like why he got benched or what led up to that. We can get into that more in the off season, kind of as RosterMania breaks down. But Dallas, they I didn't say that I wouldn't say that they had a perfect season even last year when they won champs because
No.
they had their ups and downs. But this year just seemed to be a little more turbulent. But you kind of expect that when Clayster, who's one of the best Call of Duty players of all time, he can't be on your roster because of the switch from 5v5 to 4v4. And I think they struggled from kind of just a change in leadership and in the way the team dynamic was from last season. But still a great performance. They were a map away from beating Toronto and getting to their second straight Champs Grand Finals. So congrats to them. A good third place performance. Just a really good series. That is the final series of Saturday. And then we have the Champs Grand Finals, a best of 9 series on Sunday. So there is no kind of advantage that we talked about at majors where the losers bracket team is warmed up and they've already played at least one match before they head into the grand finals. Everybody is coming in kind of cold. We don't really know what to expect. I think I predicted 5-2 for FaZe to win this over. I think it was So in Mike's pick'em at least. But I gotta look it up for our pick'em or for our
We had
bracket.
Optic.
Oh, I thought we went with FaZe at the end.
Well, we had FaZe beating Optic. I'm saying.
Oh yeah. I was talking about like who we thought won. So we said FaZe would be Optic 5-4. I don't know if we said in like our brain picks if Toronto got to the grand finals what would happen, but I think we both said that FaZe would win. So we both thought, we were both confident that FaZe was going to come out on top. I'm not sure how you want to break down this grand finals because we have 8 maps to talk about. We don't really need to discuss like every single one in great detail. But that first map, Atlanta just doesn't look like the Atlanta that we've been accustomed to seeing. Simp in particular, he has maybe his worst game of the season. I know he had like 1 or 2 bad maps earlier in the season, but he goes 10-26 on Moscow Hardpoint. So not what you're expecting from him or the team. They lose map 1. Would you kind of like just do you want to break down the series a little bit, kind of like what your expectations were, what you were thinking as the series progressed?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, you obviously tweeted it out heading into this grand finals, but it started out looking like FaZe was at least gonna be favored for map 1, because Moscow Hardpoint had notably been one of their most successful hardpoints throughout the season. They kind of, I think Optic might have beat them when they beat them in like that stage 5 group play. They might have beat them on Moscow Hardpoint if I'm remembering correctly. But it certainly, I just remember like throughout the season, statistically, it was one of their better hardpoints, and obviously the record supports that. They were 10-4 on Moscow Hardpoint heading into this match, and Toronto were 2-5. So definitely was one you kind of expected Atlanta to come out swinging right away and take, but that's just not what happened. You noted that Simp kind of struggled in the first map, and it could have been, you know, attributed to like not being warmed up, all that stuff. But either way, they don't get it done there. And most notably, they didn't get any time on the second hard point there on Moscow, which is kind of a money hill that you want to like rotate for early, get set up, and try and rack up a lot of time. And if you're not able to get any time on that, it's kind of like self-explanatory as to how they struggled. And it could be, like you pointed out, Simp struggling in that one. If the team's not picking up kills or slaying, it's going to be hard to get control of that hard point. So it makes sense in hindsight. But regardless, it was just kind of a shocker right away to see Toronto come out and take that one. But then we get Express Search as the next map, which is one that Toronto, according to your stat thing, was 10-2 on, and Atlanta was 6-8, and Atlanta ends up taking that one 6-5. We did notably in that one there was that super close play by Bance where like he was in it got down to a 1, I think it was a 1v2 for Cell, but it got down to a 1v1 between Cell and Bance, and Cell kind of like finessed his life just long enough, obviously. But at the time, it wasn't clear if it was long enough. He just like kind of finesses a little bit. Bance gets the kill and runs up to the bomb, and it literally looks like he picked up the bomb at like 7.499 instead of 7.5, and he just doesn't get the defuse. And that was obviously a big round because if they win that, Toronto potentially wins the map and goes up 2-0 in the grand final. So who knows what happens from there if he gets that defuse. But that was obviously one of the highlight moments from that map. I know in round 11, I wrote down here that Abizi got 3 kills. I'm pretty sure he just had a strong map 2 in general, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Abizi went 12-8. So Kleenex went 13-6. So a good showing out of him, but FaZe gets that round 11 win here in game 2 to tie up the series.
Yeah, and then they go to raid control and then raid hardpoint. So back-to-back raid maps where FaZe is just completely dominant. They win 3-0 on control. I actually brought up the breaking point kind of layout on the stream, so kind of to give you like a physical representation of how the series went.
Okay.
So FaZe wins 3-0 on raid control. Looking at the stats of BZ and Simp, they combined for 51 kills, so they're kind of doing their thing. Both of them, the Simp had a 1.93 KD, BZ had a 2.18. You can say that they're frying. The Tiny Terrors just completely obliterated Toronto in control to get a 2-1 map lead, and then raid hardpoint, pretty much the same. They 100-point club, Toronto 250-78. Arcides was the only player that didn't get a positive KD for FaZe. BZ 23-12, Cell 26-15, and Simp 20-14. And I mean that's just kind of what you expect. Like this looked like the FaZe of old, like what we had seen against New York and what we had seen against Dallas. Like this team is completely dominant, and I think at this point in the series, like people are like, oh crap, maybe Toronto are like in real trouble because they go up 3-1 in the series. They only need 2 more to win, and then they're going to Miami search and destroy. Do you want to go through the search and destroy, because this was kind of what Ultra fans were saying, like if we can get a win here, we can kind of make a run and kind of maybe rattle off 2 or 3 map wins in a row.
Yeah, so that we don't have to go too in depth for this one.
Yeah.
It was a pretty convincing win for Toronto, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that this was the map 5 in the stage 5 major, which, as we obviously know now, Toronto went into this with a 4-0 lead, and Minnesota wins the Miami Search there 6-3 to start their historic comeback. So I thought it was a little interesting that we see it shows up again in this grand final situation with Toronto facing a 3-1 deficit, almost a must-win map. Basically, you don't want to go put FaZe on match point there. And they take care of business and get the job done to push it to another control with only a 3-2 deficit.
Yeah, and coming in, like neither of these teams were dominant on Miami Search because FaZe was 5-3 coming in, and Toronto was 5-6. So it wasn't like neither team had like this distinct advantage, which wasn't really the case in Garrison Control because both of these teams were really good at Garrison, but I mean FaZe was 19-4 heading into this on Garrison Control, Toronto 13-6. So I would say that FaZe had proven like they were the better Garrison Control team, and they win 3-2, which gets them to 4 map wins, puts them on match point heading into Raid, Search, and Destroy. This might have been one of the best searches of the entire season. Just like an incredible map. They go down to round 11, and Toronto, they're able to pull it off. They win 6-5. I'm not. I believe so. This was the map where I think it was Simp that had both of his streaks, right? And he just kind of blows them. Or is that?
And are you talking about in Search?
Or no, I guess that was. Was I thinking of like Raid Hardpoint or something? Like, what am I thinking of?
I think you're thinking of. I think you're thinking of the control. That's what I'm
Okay.
trying to
Yeah.
bring up real quick. You kind of just skipped over the control a little bit. It was a 3-2 win for Atlanta on Garrison, but Toronto went up 2-0 on it, and then
Yeah.
Atlanta
That was it.
won 3 straight. And I believe, I know Atlanta had to win 2 offenses to get that win, so I think Atlanta started on offense. They lost the first round. Toronto then wins an offense on Garrison, which is really hard. We've talked about it multiple times at length on the podcast there. Um, Toronto wins an offense on Garrison Control to go up 2-0. Then Atlanta wins an offense to force it to round 4. They win a defense where Arcides and Celium both get streaks heading into round 5, which is another offense for FaZe. And even though they had like bad streak usage, I think Cell had a team kill with an artillery. They just weren't the most effective streaks. Atlanta was still able to clutch up and get that another offense win on Garrison Control in overtime to close it out. And I was just going to bring up, because it was good timing. Obviously, this tweet came after the grand finals, but just because we were talking about the Miami and the Garrison, Arcides tweeted after the grand finals, he said 2 things. 1, F Miami, and 2, that Gary Control was out of a effing movie, Lord. So I think that does a good job of summing up both of those 2 maps there where, Atlanta obviously didn't really see a lot of success there in Miami, but they had a really good comeback on Garrison Control, which that's a huge momentum shift in the series because if Atlanta wins that control, it's 3-3 instead of, FaZe being on championship point. So we've talked about Atlanta being good at control, but this kind of just, showing their composure and being able to come back, that was really impressive, and it was a very entertaining map.
For sure. About that Raid Search, so they go down to 5-5, and then there's a 2v2 in round 11. So I believe it was Celium and Arcides versus Bance and Insight. And Toronto's on offense, so FaZe has the advantage here, and Insight gets the first kill, I believe, and then Bance gets the second one to close it out to get to force a map 8, and I mean, just like the fact that Toronto is able to pull out these search wins. Obviously, they weren't able to pull out Express, which would have been really big for them because they would have been up 2-0 to start the series. But they win Miami search in Game 5, which kind of slows down FaZe's momentum. And here they extend the series by winning Raid search. And I mean, just a really impressive win for Toronto here. Do you have any thoughts on this map in particular?
No, I think you summed up that one. We don't have to go crazy in depth. I know Cammy had a couple good moments throughout the raid search. I think he had like he had the 4-piece when he was top laundry in one round, and I think he had a 2-piece or a 3-piece in another round. So he certainly played well aside from everything else we talked about in that map. So he went 13-9. Cell went 12-6. So it was a really good search, like you said, and it brings us to an apocalypse hardpoint, which in hindsight, obviously FaZe ends up taking this one. But if you asked me before, not even before the series, but maybe like when Apocalypse was added to the rotation. If you asked me what I thought the last map of the Cold War season would have been, I probably wouldn't have picked Apocalypse Hardpoint, but that's the world we live in.
I was hoping that it wasn't going to be Apocalypse Hardpoint because I don't really, as a viewer, I don't like this map very much. But I mean, FaZe I won't say they dominated Hardpoint because it was 250 to 147, but they certainly won this convincingly. They were able to just every time that Toronto got any momentum, or they were able to, even get like 20 to 30 seconds on a hill, it was immediately stamped out. Atlanta were able to get back into control, and they win this 250 to 147. They win the 2021 Call of Duty League Championship. I mean, what are your thoughts on this map and FaZe's win in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as much of an Apocalypse hater as other people. Um, I obviously will freely admit that it's not like the best map ever. Certainly not, but I don't think it's that bad. I think it has some moments. It's obviously uh, having spawn control is just really important because there's so many hills where if you don't have the good spawns, it's just tough to break, especially with P2. And we see right off the bat for this one, FaZe started on good side, which means they spawn in Temple with P2 down to their right. Um, and Toronto was able to immediately just flip the spawns and kind of build an early lead. And, it starts making you think like, uh-oh, this could get out of hand really quick. But it doesn't. FaZe is able to rebound, take control of the map. One thing that stuck out to me that was really cool was Celium had that spot. A lot of people were talking about it being like a nerd spot or however you want to classify it, where he was in the building by the statue, or people call it Turtle Hill, P4, and then you got to go out that building to go towards P5. And there's like a corner on the side of the building that a lot of like people, anchoring isn't really a thing in Hardpoint anymore, but like people try to control that area to have those back spawns for the P5. And Celium showed off a spot that I hadn't seen used before this, and I don't think, based on the reaction, I don't think a lot of other people had seen it, where he just like jumps and shoots Bance like through the window to get a huge kill there, change spawns and help FaZe push through the back there to get control of P5. But yeah, Celium had a really good map here, was able to get streaks. I don't think they really came into play because if I'm remembering like the clip of them winning in my head, he like just calls in the cruise at the end and doesn't even have to get a kill with it. They just get the time to end it. But yeah, it was an exciting map, certainly, just from the like mindset there that Toronto made it close at the beginning, definitely pushed FaZe to the point where like they had to rebound from losing those spawns early in the map and regain map control to ultimately win the map and the series and COD champs. But it obviously would have been exciting to see, like a game 9, round 11 might have been like heart wrenching or, super nerve wracking for the players. But obviously, as fans, a lot of people wanted to see that. But we don't get it. We get a nice hard point ending, and FaZe, as an organization, gets that first COD champs win.
Yeah, it's congratulations to FaZe, obviously the most deserving team. Toronto, they were a very deserving team about this. They were, I would say, the second best team since basically Dallas started having their issues like in stage 2. So I mean that's just been a really impressive run. Um, do you want to talk about the Seattle stuff? So Seattle Surge, they drop their entire Call of Duty roster plus Nubsy, their head coach. Yeah, do you want to talk about this for a little bit?
Yeah. Before we get into that, though, I just want to bring up real quick. I don't think we said it yet in this show, but we did mention it was a $2.5 million tournament. First place was $1.2 million. So that's what FaZe ends up walking away with for winning this. And most notably, Abizi finally, in my eyes, finally gets that recognition he deserves. I know obviously he gets a ton of recognition, but he finally gets that MVP award, just winning it for, I can't remember what the exact terminology they use. Obviously, Simp wins MVP for the
The
regular
season.
season, but then Abizi gets it for champs or just the grand finals of champs. And I just thought it was funny that after I was on the Abizi hype train for regular season MVP, Simp wins it for that, and then in the grand finals, I thought Cell was actually deserving of just the grand finals MVP, but Abizi ends up taking it. So congratulations to obviously everybody on FaZe, just a really good season out of them. But I just thought it was funny that, for anybody who's religiously listening to the podcast, they knew I was, on that Abizi MVP train. And then when it comes to grand finals, I'm like, yeah, so I think Cell deserves it, but Abizi finally gets it. So I was happy for them, regardless. If you got to go to the bathroom, go ahead. I can take it from here.
Yeah, just talk about like what you think about the Surge and what you would like to see them do next. And I guess Crone, I
Yep.
think he tweeted something out about them hiring a new
Yep.
coach. So I'll be back.
All right. Um. So yeah, as he said, now that champs is over, we are officially in RosterMania, but technically RosterMania got off to an early start because I believe it was on Friday of Champs. I'm gonna look real quick before I start. Yeah, so on August 20th, which was the Friday of Champs, Seattle, who weren't competing at Champs because they weren't in the top 8 in the regular season, um, they come out and announce that they are completely just like entering a rebuild period, moving into 2022. Um, Seattle released Octane, Pristini, Classic, and Gunless, who was their current roster at the end of the season. They also released Looney, who was on their starting roster at the start of the year, then was moved to the bench. And they also replaced Nubs, or they, at this time, they released Nubsy, who was the head coach of Seattle. What Preston also mentioned before dipping out real quick was that Crone CDL Intel has reported that the Surge will be signing Phoenix, Sam Phoenix. I'm not too sure exactly on what he goes by, but I know his name. It looks like his name is Sam, and his Twitter user is Phoenix. So I think he goes by Sam Phoenix or just Phoenix. Um, he will reportedly be Seattle's new head coach heading into the Vanguard season next year. So um, that is where we are at right now with RosterMania. We don't know anything about Seattle's upcoming team. We just know that reportedly Phoenix will be the coach. And outside of that, it's just the 5 players that were released by Seattle are now free agents. Um, but we know that uh, Looney has retired from competing, which was announced earlier today. We talked about I talked about Revan just very briefly, um, announcing that he's a free agent. He was New York's head coach this year, the last 2 years. But Looney announced today that his playing days have come to an end, so he's effectively retired from competing, and he's looking for a coaching opportunity heading into 22, which I think is really interesting because he's, especially towards the latter half of his career, he has been considered a very smart player, a good leader. You look at like those Rise teams in World War II where he had a lot of success. That's just like the first thing that pops out where you just picture him as a good in-game leader. And I feel like his skill set, just based on what we saw from him towards the end of his career, I think he has the ability to transition into being an effective coach in the CDL. So I wish him good luck. I'm not sure exactly, obviously, since he just announced earlier today that he's not playing anymore and he's going to be looking for coaching. We have no idea where he's going to go or anything like that. But I'm certainly interested to see if he gets an opportunity to coach because I think he'll do a good job at it if he does get a chance.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for doing that.
I need a drink.
All right. I think that especially if Rise gets in, the Rise Nation, if they get involved and are an expansion team, I 100% think he will end up being the head coach because he
Absolutely.
he's had he has a good relationship with Pac-Man, who used to be the Optic LA coach and is now the Rise GM, and he, like you said, he formerly played for Rise, so there's that connection as well. Um, I mean, I should we should note just a little bit that Cloud9's kind of been teasing that they're going to get back into Call of Duty. Right after Champs ended, they were kind of hinting at it. So that would be maybe an opportunity for Looney, but I think he seems to be well liked among many of the pro players, which is, I mean, if that's not obvious, like that's a very big help when you're getting involved in coaching. If people like you and want to work with you and don't hate your guts, that's kind of a good thing. And he seems to be well liked, so that works in his favor as well. As for Revan, I'm kind of shocked that maybe he does, like you said, he just kind of resigns with New York and he's just seeing
Yeah.
what else is out there. Maybe kind of like this could also just be a negotiation tactic where he sees what teams are offering him to be their coach, or whatever his official role is, because he's kind of like the head of their entire operation there. So he seems to be vital to New York, and I mean, from at least from his playing days and his time with the CWL and like casting everything, I thought he was one of the more interesting and more intelligent people that spoke about Call of Duty.
Absolutely.
So he could go to any team and make them better just by his coaching. But if you're New York, I would 100% try to lock him down immediately. So yeah, I think those are two. I don't really know how Looney will work out as a coach. Like I mean, I don't know kind of what impact anybody has as coaches, to be honest, because we don't kind of like it's not the same as traditional sports where coaches get a lot of the credit for their team's success. Like Bill Belichick gets a lot of credit for the New England Patriots' success. I mean, if I don't think Crowder is getting nearly as much credit for FaZe's success as say Belichick does. So maybe Looney will be a good coach. I think he'll get the opportunity regardless, even if it's as maybe an assistant or something in the first year not playing.
Yeah, that just reminded me real quick though. Did want to shout out Crowder just because he officially became the first person in Call of Duty history to win COD champs as a player and a coach.
That's cool.
So congratulations to him. I thought that was cool. Chrome tweeted out the list of all the people who have won champs, and he had Crowder in the One Ring category, but it was like Crowder, and then in parentheses +1 as a coach.
Yeah.
So that got Tremor and I thinking like, do you count him in the 2-ring category or does he belong in that 1-ring category? It's just something we haven't obviously had to see because he is the first person to win as a player and coach. So that's an interesting topic we can talk about at another time. It could become a thing like, say, for example, if J-Cap wins champs as a coach, he obviously has multiple rings as a player. So as more COD players who have succeeded in champs retire and potentially move on to coaching roles, it could be something we see more down the road. But certainly, shout out to Crowder for everything he does with FaZe and being the first to be able to claim that. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, like you mentioned with Looney and Rise, I 100% agree with you. If Rise does find a way into the CDL, I think he's like a no-brain fit for them just based on their past and their connection. But I think it is important to note that we have heard absolutely nothing about expansion. It seems like at this point that I feel like personally, if expansion was going to happen, we would have heard something about it by now. Like there would have been some rumors or like potentially even like Crone tweeting something, whatever. I feel like we would have heard something by now. Maybe that, like you mentioned with the Cloud9 stuff, maybe that's like the start of it. So we're obviously going to have to keep an eye on whether or not expansion is a thing throughout the offseason, because that obviously has major implications on RosterMania. But I just wanted to reiterate that we haven't heard anything about potential expansion for this year yet.
Yeah, you don't listen to this podcast to get scoops. Like, that's not something you should be listening for, because we're not gonna, sit here and drop bombs like Crone does on Twitter or anything. So, yeah, we definitely don't know anything. I'm optimistic, I guess, about that, and I think that Rise could be a possible team to
Definitely.
get involved if, a traditional esports organization does end up becoming an expansion team. Cloud9, I mean, I don't know why the hell they would be teasing anything Call of Duty related unless they're trying to get into the challenger scene, which seems like incredibly stupid. So I don't really know what their end game is there. But yeah, we don't know anything. But yeah, so we'll just kind of have to wait and see for Looney where he ends up. If Revan ends up returning to New York and all of the other RosterMania stuff. Before we get out of here, just kind of what are you looking for in RosterMania? Like, what is the most interesting, team or interesting player in terms of like where they may end up or what kind of roster they're you would think that they would kind of construct?
I feel like I'm in a tough spot right now, personally, just like thinking about what could happen. But I know just because like of the whole 1+1 situation with people technically becoming free agents if they've spent 2 full years in the CDL, there's technically a lot of free agents, and it's potentially like in comparison to last year, we saw changes because it moved from 5v5 to 4v4. But like before the CDL, heading into MW, there was obviously a lot of free agents because it was the start of franchising. And anybody who signed those initial 1+1 deals, if they're now free agents, it could potentially lead to an absolutely wild roster mania with a lot of people potentially being unrestricted free agents. But on the other hand, I feel like, just off the top of my head, I don't think FaZe makes a change, obviously. I don't think Toronto makes a change. They were talking on that Slack and Looney show we were talking about earlier today, which is just speculation, but I think they were saying that like Kleenex might be the only one who hasn't signed yet, and he could potentially like get offers from elsewhere. But I feel like Toronto sticks. They have that European thing going, and like Kleenex and Insight are former teammates going back to Black Ops 4. It seems like they have like good chemistry together as a team. So I would be surprised if Toronto made a change. And I also, like we kind of mentioned with Optic, I don't know what direction they're going to go in there. I wouldn't be surprised though if Optic doesn't make a change. And then Minnesota, I also feel like I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make a change. So that's 4 teams just right off the top, where I'm like, obviously FaZe isn't making a change. That would just be absurd. But then you have Toronto, Minnesota, and Optic are in that category in my head at least, where it's like I could see them not making a change. I guess they could maybe change like one person. Um, but other than that, I think the rest of the team that it's going to be a free for all. And some teams are going to be in a position where they have to change more than others. Obviously, we already see with Seattle, they're going for a complete rebuild, so they're going to have to sign, unless they re-sign uh, Gunless Classic or Bristini, because obviously it doesn't seem like Octane has any aspirations to return to the organization. So unless they sign one of those other three guys, it seems like Seattle will have a completely new lineup this year. Whereas if you look at a team like Dallas, for example, maybe Dallas is only looking for one, and they keep like Krim, Illy, and Shotzi, and try to add somebody else in there. So yeah, I think a lot of speculation right now. Even though Seattle kicked things off, we are still very early in this RosterMania period, and a lot can happen in the next weeks and months.
I think the Vanguard beta, that's like September, right?
So this weekend is the Champion Hill Alpha. It is PlayStation exclusive. And it's like the new mode that they're adding. They previewed the trailer during Champs, and I didn't even rewatch it yet. I think it's like a 3v3 mode or something like that, similar to like Face Off from previous games. So I didn't look at it too much actually. I should definitely rewatch it before it happens. But that's going to be this weekend, and then they're going to have a week. I think it's like the September 10th, I believe. I'm going to look at the calendar real quick. I don't have the
I just
article
like
that
while
we
you're
wrote.
looking it up, I just think like teams might. I don't want to like base completely off that beta, but I mean if someone like is absolutely dirt at the beta, then like maybe they don't get picked up as quickly. And I just think that teams probably aren't in any rush to go out and sign guys like right now, unless you can get like a big name. Like I think the most obvious thing would be like the Thieves signing Octane like that,
Yeah,
because that was at least from what we've heard is like that was a potential option for him before last season, because it kind of fell apart at the last step because they were going to be on OGLA because they had a second place finish at the previous champs. They go into the CDL and things just kind of fall apart in terms of like what the team was supposed to be. And I think Octane said he was even talks to get to go to Dallas before Shotzi came in and like got acquired or whatever. So like there are a lot of things that changed, but that would make the most sense because Slasher, Kenny, and Octane, as well as Priesta and who was their fifth on the 100 Thieves and Black Ops
enable.
4. Enable, yeah. So Enable was a part of 100 Thieves as a content creator. Slasher and Kenny are obviously on the team right now. I don't really see Priesta coming back, and even if he did, like there's not enough spots on that team probably, unless they kick out Draza. But he performed pretty well in his slot both last season and this season. So I think Octane is someone to watch out for, but I would expect it to be 100 or LA Thieves, just like as a personal thing. In terms of just like the total league as a whole, I would say like no fewer than 10 teams will probably make roster changes. Like FaZe are almost definitely not making a change. Like I'd fly to Atlanta and slap each one of them if they decide to break up what could be ultimately the best Call of Duty team of all time, depending on what their success ends up being. So I don't think that they should make a change, and I don't think they will. Toronto is a different case because last season the only team that didn't make a change outside of like just dropping one player was Dallas, who won the event. So even FaZe, who got to the grand finals and played really well the entire season, they even decided to make a change by getting rid of Major Maniac and Priesta. So like that, I don't know if Toronto will do the same thing. I don't think they should, but it'll be interesting to see if even the second place team feels like the need to try to improve their roster after losing to FaZe in the grand finals. And then the biggest thing to watch for this offseason is Scump, because if Scump retires, the whole Call of Duty esports landscape changes, because you have the most recognizable, the most popular player on the most popular and most recognizable team, and that person's not there anymore. What happens to Optic? Because that roster is essentially built around Scump. Like in terms of like branding, like Scump is the guy. He's been the guy basically since Nadeshot retired. So like he's the guy. He's like the centerpiece, and he has been for years. So if he ends up retiring, I don't see him leaving. I think if he was like, I don't want to play with X, Y, and Z, Hex would probably be like, okay, we will drop them for you. Like you're the most important guy. So, but like we said earlier, I don't really know what they can do to improve their roster. Like who, if you drop Formal, who replaces him? Like, I mean, I would love to see Clayster join Optic. Like in terms of like, I think he would fit really well in that team. He's obviously teamed with Scump before. I think they've dropped the beef that they had in the past, so that would be good. And I mean, I don't think there's any beef between Dashy and Clay, even though I do think they had like some tweets back and forth earlier in the year. I don't think there's any beef there. I think that was more just banter. And I think I think he would fit really well in that roster. And to see two of the GOATs team up together again, the X Games gold medalist team, we need to get Proofy back on the squad and we'll be all set. So I think that'll be interesting. And one last thing, New York is really weird, like in terms of if Revan doesn't come back, what happens there? And if Clayster ends up not coming back, what happens there? Hydra, I mean, I don't know what his contract situation's like. Maybe he signed a 1+1, but he's someone to build around. Like, this is me being optimistic, but if Zuma came back and is able to compete again, what happens then? So,
I mean, we can obviously go more in depth another time.
This is more just a primer for things to come.
Yeah, but with New York in particular, just real quick, you would assume, unless there's some special contract we don't know about, that Hydra signed a 1+1 contract this year because this is his debut, which would mean New York would have the option to extend him for 2022. And at the same time, because Asim was on Minnesota in the first season, it's possible that he signed a 1+1 with New York, and he could potentially be extended for 2022, and then that would just leave 2 spots, because obviously Mac was similar to like Awakening in the sense of coming in mid-season, so you don't really know what his contract situation is, and then Clay, there's the whole thing with him potentially going back to Dallas mid-season. Is that something that happens in this offseason? A lot of question marks for New York, certainly, like you said.
A lot of question marks around the Call of Duty League, but that's why we love RosterMania. It will be, I would assume, over the next month or maybe 2 months even. I mean, so Vanguard comes out like that first like Friday in November, if I'm not mistaken, which would be
that's what I was looking up.
November 4th, probably 5th.
It comes out November 5th officially. So, yeah. And just real quick to highlight what we were talking about earlier, the Champion Hill Alpha is this weekend, exclusive to PlayStation. Then the first weekend of the beta is also PlayStation exclusive. That is September 10th to the 13th. Then we have the second weekend, September 16th to the 17th is an open beta for PlayStation, and then early access for Xbox and PC. And then the open beta for all platforms is the 18th to the 20th.
Good to know. Make sure to, if you're really interested in Vanguard, check out the alpha if you have PlayStation, and maybe I'll get my 200 GBs in for Vanguard. I mean, if you're betting on it, I would bet the under, but I'll try to get the over. I'm about 200 shy for this season, so not been a good look for me. But I think that about does it. We had a very long and I think a really good episode because
Yep.
this is the end of the 2021 season. Everything from now on, we're going into the off season. We're going into this really hectic time of roster changes, and we don't really know what the 2022 Call of Duty League will even look like, because if we have expansion teams, that will shake up how the league is going right now. And the game is probably the most important part. How will Vanguard help or hurt the competitive scene? So a lot to be excited about and to expect in the next few months as a Call of Duty esports fan. As for the podcast, we're not beholden to the weekly schedule that the CDL has been putting out, because we've been doing these on Tuesday evenings at 11:30 p.m. Eastern, and we've been doing that because Bink and I, we don't have real good schedules that work together. We kind of complement each other at Dot Esports, so that has been kind of tough for us. But we'll still be doing podcasts all throughout the off season. They just likely won't always be on Tuesday nights. Whenever big things come up, say, Octane signs with LA Thieves or Scump retires, we'll just do a podcast like that night or the next night, or whenever we can, and we'll get you guys some content. But obviously, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or you're watching on. Follow the podcast, because we've been growing throughout the entire season. We've almost tripled the amount of listens that we've gotten on our podcast, the audio version. So thank you so much for the support you guys have given us for the past, I don't know, this is like 6 or like 5 months now or something like that. So you guys have been incredible. We thank you so much for listening. Make sure to give us 5 stars on Apple if you really enjoy the podcast. Like, that helps us out so much. It can boost us up. We can be listened to by more people. We can get paid more by whoever wants to pay us, because I've never been shy to accept money from nefarious sources. So we love you guys. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. He's at JBink with 2 Ks. I'm at Presbyers, and we would like you to follow at Ego Chall Podcast on Twitter. We're also on YouTube. Don't know when the next show will be. If nothing else, we'll probably try to keep to once a week, if anything, just to kind of keep you guys updated. We could just talk about some random crap about who is the true GOAT of Call of Duty esports, or is Crim6 or Scump or Formal or Karma, like, who's the most important part to the Optic Dynasty? Just things off the top of my head like that. We could basically be like First Take or Undisputed at that. So thank you guys for listening, and Bink, take it away.
Yep. You hit the nail on the head there. Thank you guys so much for the support throughout this journey that we've embarked on so far through this season of CDL. I know I personally had a lot of fun doing this. I wanted to do podcast religiously for a while, and I've had a lot of fun talking about Call of Duty with you, Preston, and with everybody listening. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. The big thing, like Preston said, is if you want to stay updated with when we're going to be going live with our shows during RosterMania, the best place to do that is on Twitter, either our personal Twitters that he mentioned, or just at Ego Chall Podcast. Because like he said, if something drops and we feel like we want to just go live to talk about whatever's happening in RosterMania, we might do it more frequently, or the schedule will just probably be a little different during the off season. So if you guys like what we've been doing throughout the regular season, stay tuned, follow on Twitter, and hopefully you'll enjoy what we have to say about RosterMania. But yeah, long show, enough from us. Thank you guys for tuning in, and as always, remember to send the chow.